wellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives.
Welcome to Nourishing the Mother, featuring your hosts Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner.
Before we get started today, I'd love to introduce you to our new podcast sponsor, which is Fire Tonic. If you haven't heard of Fire Tonic before, it is a raw fermented apple cider vinegar that has a whole heap of other goodness in it, such as chilies, turmeric, garlic, horseradish, ginger, just to name a few, and it has this delicious warming, spicy kind of aftertaste that just warms your stomach and your solar plexus and has you feeling amazing just by taking it. But aside from that, raw apple cider vinegar is immune boosting. It's antibacterial, antiviral. It will decongest whatever you are stuffed up in the head with. It's antioxidant and anti-inflammatory. It's also the best digestive booster. Apple cider vinegar is the same pH as our natural secretions and also stimulates those natural secretions. So if you're feeling a bit low in your digestive system, if you've got a bit of a sore throat or feel something coming on, it's great. I've used this before just to knock something on its head, like a sore throat or a virus that's gone through the rest of my family. And for me, I've just kept up with the Fire Tonic little shots, which I absolutely love anyway because I love a bit of spice. And it really does just knock it on its head. So it is locally made here in Torquay, Victoria, in small batches from a really ancient gypsy recipe. And we are absolutely mad for it. So if you also need a bit of a boost this winter that you can take that is delicious, digestive and immune boosting, then please jump on to hillbilby, hillbilby.com.au and check them out. You can also use a special promo code for our tribe, which is Nourish, Nourish 10, in order to get 10% off your order, just to give it a go. Bridget and I use it. It's on our counter all the time. So head on over to hillbilby.com.au/discount/Nourish 10 to get your 10% off and start loving on some Fire Tonic.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner. And today's podcast is in response to a listener's question about anxiety. So that's where we're taking the topic of conversation today. Before we jump there, I'd love to remind you to go on to nourishingthemother.com.au and sign up to join our tribe, where once a week we'll send you a newsletter with everything we've put out in the world, and you can pick and choose where you'd love to dive a little bit deeper through a click of a button. And all we need is your email address to be able to shoot that off to you during the week. So nourishingthemother.com.au and join our tribe. So today's podcast is dealing with anxiety. Now, we did have a listener write to us and just say, I'm wondering if you can do a podcast on anxiety in the future, specifically in relation to the need for control, which often accompanies anxiety. So we had a few points here we thought, we probably are not going to do this topic justice because it is so multi-layered. And the more specific story is, for instance, if we're debriefing and going through a tribe member through one of our groups, it's a very different scenario to giving kind of like this broad spectrum overview. Yeah. So we kind of want to put out there that we're not giving any specific tools and tips here for anxiety, but we are discussing at large the topic of anxiety and personal experiences, parenting, and any sort of antidotal wisdom in process of that. So I've personally had periods of anxiety. I come from a family that the women in my family have quite extreme anxiety and mental health disorders. My daughter, my eldest daughter, suffers with anxiety. Well, I don't even like saying suffers. What do I want to say? My older daughter can manifest a great deal of anxiety. So since she was little, this has been a conversation for us and a way in which we've functioned within our home, and has probably changed the dialogue that we have around relationships in school, to the point where I don't think that school's even terribly tuned in, even though I will send them an email if something's flared up, because she doesn't typically display as a child with anxiety. And I think that that has a lot to do with what's happening in the background. So I know underneath she's running a huge amount of anxiety and energy, but she has to some extent a set of tools that she employs that are enough to get her through whatever she needs to cope with at school before she's back home again. And I do think that anxiety in children is becoming a really huge issue, and it's young. And I think it's largely still not recognised. I actually still think it's even larger than what we perceive.
I think it's interesting too. I mean, you would have perhaps in terms of people who I could imagine would be able to be perfectly equipped to deal with anxiety in children, you would be one of them. And I imagine there's a hell of a lot of parents who really wouldn't have a toolkit at all of how to work with that with their child, let alone often themselves, how to get themselves back to a state of calm, and presence. Because often, I mean, anxiety is something that you're not in the present when you're in that anxious state. It is so much about this future focus and this stress about some kind of future event or series of events that we're being pulled out of our presence and into, dealing with, grappling with.
It's totally right. It's totally right. That's, Bridget, you have hit the nail on the head. That is the crux of where I always start. And largely I find myself doing this because I coach or team manage my daughter's basketball teams at various times, and particularly the higher up you get in sport and the more pressure there feels like and the more anxiety comes out to play. So I find myself parenting children on the bench as much as parenting my children at home. And that's always the conversation starts there. Is in your mind right now, what is happening? What is the worst possible scenario? What does it mean? This thing that's just happened, what in your head have you made it mean? And I keep asking almost, sometimes it can seem a bit monotonous, I suppose. I keep asking them the same question, maybe only changing a word or two or kind of coming around the house, so to speak, in another, access point, but the same question over and over until they can get enough clarity to go, well, it means everyone will laugh at me and I'm stupid or whatever, And then once you've got that, all of a sudden they can you can see it happen in their heads. They can go, well, this is the worst possible. Sometimes there's tears that are going to come with a flood of that realization. And sometimes they're going to look at it and go, whoa, that's a pretty big leap to go from where I am now to where I am there. And they're able to kind of recognize that as a thought versus a legitimate experience that they're traversing. So I always talk about what is happening in their head right now. Like literally, what in your head have you made it mean? Where is the emotion coming from? What is playing out in pictures, in memories, in like what is happening in your head right now? I also talk about the worst possible scenario. So I'm pretty sure this came out of conversations with you, Bridget. So even with my son, if we've had events that have been sort of big and scary for them, maybe it's speaking in front of a class or, in assembly or whatever, and there's anxiety that's playing out, or maybe they're on a school excursion and there's anxiety that comes out from that, or they're going to a play date or a sleepover and there's anxiety that comes with that. It's in your head, what have you decided could happen that you're so scared of, you're wanting to run from? So what's the worst case scenario? What is the worst possible thing that could happen? And I remember this really clearly actually with my son. He was getting up to do a class project and he was terrified. And he was like, I'll get up and I won't get it right and I'll stumble and everybody in the whole class will laugh at me and I will feel terrible. And I was like, great. If that's your worst possible scenario, we can roll with that. So where we're going to start is, if the very, very worst thing happens, what is the toolkit that you have to survive / get through that? Because if you know that even if this very bad, most worst possible disastrous scenario happens, you have a way of coping and dealing, anything else is a plus. Like it's only up from there, baby.
Yeah.
So we always workshop, what are their options for dealing with themselves and a situation or others in whatever their worst possible scenario is. Because if we can kit them up for that, they're going to nail anything else. Largely anything else doesn't happen, and neither does their worst possible scenario. But realizing that, one, it's a fantasy projection that will happen and it comes out of the voids that they already have sitting there. And two, that they can deal with that. So even if that happens, they've got it. They've got their own backs. They don't need someone doing it for them. They don't need mum saying to the teacher, look, he's really nervous. I'd really rather that he could opt out of this. And,
yeah. Which is just skirting around it.
Yeah. Or, changing the scenario. I'm not asking the world to change around my child. I'm asking my child, this scenario is here for your growth. How can I help you grow? And I think it also comes back to seeing how our children are strong. They are resilient. They are not these feeble, which I actually think is one of the main fallouts from attachment parenting and our whole concept of the child being this hapless infant.
Yes. Yeah. Because really beyond the fourth trimester, that can actually be a real drawback to be holding on to that.
But even pre that, right? Like even we think about Megan's story with the triplets.
It's true.
Like how resilient and built for survival are babies. And yet when we look at modern psychology, it's based around the fact that they are completely helpless and vulnerable to everything and don't have resilience.
Yes. And, anything we do could possibly scar them for life.
Right?
Yeah.
So I do think that as a cultural mainstay of psychology is infiltrated through so much of how we view children.
And it's really, I think, it's because we know what behaviorism kind of did. It's almost swung so far the pendulum in the opposite direction where we're afraid to sort of do anything, right? Or, step one foot wrong and not trust in their inherent capability.
So I do, even when I catch myself doing it, because, sometimes your heart can just break for them and you want to save them from it and you don't want them to go through that pain because most likely you've experienced a pain similar and you know how much that shit hurts. You don't want them to go there. I get that. But I remind myself, take a breath, Julie, because this is them and they are strong. Don't see their weakness, see their strength.
I really love that. You and I talked about that this the other day when you said, but do you see the weakness or do you see their strength? Because often we're kind of orienting ourselves in one or the other. And what a gift to them and ourselves to look for the strength and to certainly communicate in a way that's really respectful, but still trust the strength because they will grow most when you trust their strength. And I've really been thinking about that in relationship to my son's resistance to swimming because there's a lot of, for him, trauma around that. And I think, I don't want to keep him stuck in that because that's not helping him. And sometimes we have to really put on our big girl kind of pants and trust that they're going to be okay and that we give them the tools to be okay and work through it. And what you're talking about here in the case of
the
this
worst case scenario,
it's a fear of future feelings. So it's a fear of how will I deal with the feelings that are going to come up if that worst case scenario happens. So what you're doing with those tools that you're giving them is giving them safety in a broader spectrum of feeling to trust that they're going to know how to work through those. And what a life skill that is.
Absolutely. And I think it's one of the main life skills for intimate relationships is handling your own anxiety as opposed to needing the other person to do it for you and make you feel better. How can you self-regulate? And I fucking hate that word because it's such a buzz cry at the moment in the education system. And I think it's largely used the wrong way because
it's almost like you're off on your own, go self-regulate.
Right, yeah.
Which is
or I'll put you next to this kid that bugs the shit out of you, but you failed because you didn't self-regulate right then. And you're 5. Do you think there's some shit that's going wrong there?
No. just to cover it off, children rely on their parents to be the mirror, to be the model for regulation. And I don't think you can do that at 5 yet, all that well.
Or that there's steps and processes, there's tools that are given, not just I expect that you can do it or can't do it. That I don't expect that the children have. Like even children that come to my house for a play day, right? I'm not looking at them going, I know you have exactly the same experience as my children, so therefore you can deal with exactly the same stuff as mine.
Yeah.
Of course not. So they sometimes need help to find the skills. And if it's not coming from home, then what a gift if it came from school or from a carer or from a grandparent. What a gift. That's the purpose of, these incredible souls that feel called to work with children often have an empathy for that. But, I do really come back to it is about helping them learn how to
regulate their own inner world. And anxiety is a major feedback loop for that. You get shaky, you get adrenaline, you feel insecurity, you feel unsafe, your fight or flight starts flaring up. That, reptilian brain starts wanting to take over from your rational brain. Like, it is a full-bodied, it's a really tough emotion to deal with, and it is emotion that a lot of adults can't deal with.
And I wonder if it's also harder to deal with because if you're used to being in your head a lot and you like to be in your head and in control, anxiety is something that takes over your whole body, as you're saying, and it can be very destabilizing if you're not comfortable with sitting with those feelings of the body. And they really, I was thinking about probably the most recently I was most anxious was watching a film. It was like I don't know, my husband watches films that I would never choose that have like violence and like suspense and all these things that just make me feel horrendous in my body. But for me, it's been a bit of a task to stay with that, because it's there for me. They're my feelings in response to response to the stimulus. And the more I can make safe those feelings, the more okay I know I am.
I kind of love that as a practice.
Yeah, it was only afterwards that I thought about it because I end up full body shaking.
Yeah, I get it.
And I don't
particularly if you're an empathic or sensitive person.
Well, it wasn't before I had children. Like, we used to always watch like Law and Order and all that kind of stuff. I can't watch that stuff now. And so it's for me it's like I go it's like a spiritual practice.
Yeah,
on
and
some
that's what
level.
I'm hearing. I love it.
Yeah, so I don't know. Try it out if you like.
When it comes to our sexuality, we want to look at the beliefs and the meanings that we've picked up as much as the ones that we've made up about our experiences.
In our Loathing to Loving program, we look at relationships to our family, partner, children and feminine self and spend a module in Nourish and Nurture, deeply expanding that feminine wisdom. Our Sensuality and Sexuality course is the next dive exclusive to those who've taken part in the Loathing to Loving program.
The reason for that is the theory and the tools that you gain from Loathing to Loving underpin the knowledge of the psychosexual story that we build upon in our Sensual Sexual Deep Dive. For $289, you can join us in our exclusive Sensuality Sexuality course, or 3 payments of $97. We really want to walk you through loving your sexuality more than your sex life.
To find out more and join us, go to nourishingthemother.com.au/online programs.
So when we're talking about the future thoughts of anxiety, because you're projecting into the future, I think it's worthwhile. This is also where I see it such a beautiful overlay between parenting and, as you're talking about, Bridget, conscious embodiment, because even by virtue of upskilling ourselves or teaching our children, we're still learning and absorbing. And I just think that's the most fantastic dynamic. So when we're talking about stepping into our body, I'm thinking about, first off, practices that I do myself and practices that I teach children. So particularly I deal with all of the girls when they're coming off the court or whatever and they're, feeling quite emotional, is they're like a deer in the headlights, like you often say, Bridge. And I'm really getting them to come back into the present moment and back into their bodies, because when people are in anxiety, you can read their body, right? It's their brain is like gone. You might as well be in a dream world because their eyes are darting around. Maybe they're looking for mum or dad or the person who usually soothes for them because they haven't learnt how to self-soothe. So they're seeking, the anxiety is heightened because they don't have any skills themselves for doing that for themselves. And so they need this other person. And this is the danger zone with a relationship, a long-term intimate relationship as well, is when you need someone to make you better as opposed to you being a sole unit and then able to bring your full self to a relationship. I think this is an incredibly important skill. And it starts when they're babies and when they're kids. And let me tell you, by the time they're 10, you can see it playing out.
Yeah.
So funnily enough, there's this one girl on my daughter's team who cries. There's a couple cries every single game. And so at some point, I know I'm removing her to sit next to me and I'm getting down on the ground and I'm at eye level and she's darting around looking for the person who's going to save her. And my first step is just look at me. Just keep looking at my eyes. And we're going to focus your breath. I want you to notice how it's up in your head and up in your chest and you're really feeling tight. We're going to bring it back into your belly. I'm going to put my hand on your belly button and I want you to push it outwards. And you can see them go, okay, focus on pushing my hand, and giving them the thing to focus on.
Yeah.
Brings them back in. And then you'll see their energy dart back into the head and they're looking around again for the person who's going to save them. Come back. You can do this. You have the ability to bring your feelings back down and we're going to do this together, you know, blah, blah, blah.
I'm already doing it. I'm like kind of like putting the air.
And with my daughter, if she was in a really heightened state, we'd start with breath. But when I'm sending her with tools for something like, you know, it used to be getting out on the basketball court actually would create a huge amount of anxiety for her. And so we would talk about that in her tummy she has a cage, like an old-fashioned bird cage, and it's filled with butterflies. And she gets to have the choice of taking a big breath in and opening that gate out on her out-breath and all those butterflies flying out. And she can watch them fly out and she can look at their colours and she can look at how pretty they are. And anytime she feels those flutters of butterflies stuck in the cage again, she takes a breath and she opens that gate again and out they come.
That's so beautiful.
It's worked marvelously well for her. So well. So well. So I always think coming back to the breath is incredibly important. And it also, I hope I'm really getting across to you how important it is that we teach our children this. This is literally the stuff that will change how they show up in a relationship when they're adults. Like
it's just
it
profound.
Really is.
Yeah.
Because your ability to hold your own sense of self in a relationship, we need enough separateness because as soon as you're merging, clinging, desperately needing someone to do something that you need to learn to do on your own, there's going to be disintegration. No one can be that for you. And this is growth. This is why you'll find relationships that push you on that because it's pushing that energy back to you.
Yeah.
This is yours.
Yeah.
Stop making it mine. And to upskill ourselves, we can give our kids these skills.
And how rich is that? Because so often we can be quick to get caught in the stories of like, my partner's so this, or it's just not okay the way that they're like that. And in fact, when you reframe it as if they're pushing this energy back to you to own, I mean, what a gift, right?
It really is.
I love that.
The more I see it play out in relationships, the more I think this is so important because it doesn't matter, like we can talk to the cows come home about how to communicate to the masculine and what it is that you say and how you say it and the choice of words that you use and that you can talk, it's no different to an I statement, right? You can use whatever words you want to use, but ultimately, if you can't regulate your own anxiety, it does not matter what words you use.
Yeah, the words are just fall on deaf ears because if your energy is completely, your words might say one thing, but you are not embodying those at all.
And nor can you because you're stuck actually. If you are unable to regulate your own anxiety, you're stuck in the future anyway. So any conversation you think you're having in the present is already coming out based on whatever you've already projected and thought about and manifested within your mind that is going to play out or hasn't played out or might play out if you say this or that, or if you make it's like a chess game in your head, right? If I make this move, he'll make that move. So I'll make this move to counterbalance his move.
Oh my God,
like that you've already played that out in your head. And so your present isn't present conversation anyway.
And it has an agenda. Like it doesn't have a present focus on, the now. It has an agenda to either create or avoid something in the future based on your future prediction. So it's very disconnected.
Yes, absolutely it is. And so when we're talking about having really conscious relationships, that is how much discomfort can you handle on your own? Because the amount that you can handle on your own is the amount you can have consciousness in a relationship. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it's almost the amount you can handle within your own nervous system to,
right?
In terms of not having to lash out or attack on, because that can be, also a pattern people get into, is instead, how much can I embody here and feel into and seek wisdom in and transform? Because it's never like, we don't have to fix our partner or our child. It's about our relationship to them and how we are relating to them based on their feedback that's coming back to us about us through them.
Because no one sees you better as much as you don't want to hear it. We have this idea of who we are. But our partners are the first ones to figure out who we are. We just often don't like it. And same with our kids, right?
Yeah.
So no one sees you better than they do, and same goes for you. But we often don't like to hear, which leads me on to ego and identity. And I think this gets really wrapped up in anxiety. That particularly if I've built myself on being the person that has a really good relationship, is a really good communicator, is a really conscious parent, is really healthy, doesn't get sick. I don't know, I'm trying to think what else. Whatever that you've built up as the identity, that if someone went on your Instagram or your Facebook page, they'd go, oh, that's who she is and that's what she represents and that's what she does. Well, when that stuff starts to not go right, which particularly if it's a high value, it will.
Yeah.
And that we're so intertwined in our identity to those things that when those things are crumbling, we feel as though we are crumbling.
Yeah. And it can put us into free fall, or it can put us on the attack as well as our animal states kind of like, in triage, damage control on our identity.
Or full of so much shame that we're not living up to who we thought we were.
To our projected sense of self.
Or who we should be. And shame grows in the shadows, right? Anxiety grows in the shadows. All the stuff that's not said, all the stuff that's not brought into light, all the things we've already, on that chessboard game, already decided in our head can be said or can't be said or should be said or shouldn't be said because And the more that we do not own our authentic self, the bigger that anxiety will build. And I find that a really self-destructive space. And I think it's a space that a lot of women find themselves in. And all of us, I'm not saying any one particular type of woman. I don't know. I ran a women's circle last night and this is just so abundantly clear to me is just how not okay it is for so many of us just to be who we are.
It's so heartbreaking.
It's really heartbreaking, but I can so even see myself in that journey of, conscious parenting or being a naturopath or, it wasn't okay for me to get sick. And, when my kids did this or that it was a reflection of me versus them on their own.
Yes, yes.
And that, I had to kind of keep my cards close to my chest because if you really knew that I wasn't coping,
yeah, what would that mean for my sense of identity and who I paint myself to be in the world?
Yeah, or my relationships. Or what does that mean for you? Will you run? Will you stay? If I'm failing here, does that mean I don't have any wisdom to give you? But I'm the person who always gives the wisdom to everyone. Deeply
humbling and ego shattering.
Yes. And I so see anxiety wrapped up in this thing that I'm not okay. And the things that I'm feeling reinforced to me that I'm not okay. And I think the way that anxiety tends to manifest in motherhood, particularly early motherhood, is that it's often coupled with that shedding and transforming and rebuilding of identity that I just hear time and time again so many women didn't feel ready for. Like they didn't know what it was going to be like, had this pregnancy and knew that they were going to have a baby, but in a kind of, not in a very, I don't know what the word is, but not in a very fully grasped way, if you know what I mean. Like it was almost like this thing maybe in the future and I'll still be me, but the breaking open of ourselves that happens in motherhood, I don't think, and can we be ready for it? I don't think we can. No.
But I don't think that there's enough out there that women can access or know how to access to help them rebuild that sense of self, that new self that is born as we are born as mothers. And that is, I think, where the anxiety can also manifest, because it's like, who am I if I don't go back to work, or if I do go back to work, and am I going to be accepted, and am I enough, and will they judge me, or will I have to work more, or will I be valued, or what about my child? Is it going to affect them if they're in daycare? And just the constant questioning all of the time, and destabilizing too.
It really is. My heart totally goes out to anyone that finds themselves really trapped in the cage that is anxiety.
I think a cage is such a great term, because it's so true of what that feels like.
But I do want to rib this conversation just a little bit.
We always like to rib things a little bit, don't we?
And just gently touch on the benefits of anxiety. Because let me talk about my daughter with anxiety. I can see the benefits to her in manifesting anxiety so clearly.
Yeah, talk about that. Tell us about that.
So she is the most conscientiously organised person you will ever meet. Not within the home,
No,
but in every
because
other
I didn't think
area of life.
Okay.
At school, in the classroom, in any of her extracurriculars, she is above and beyond pre-prepared for everything.
Is that as because she knows that if she's not, she'll
the
be
anxiety of not having the prop, the thing, the homework, the diary, the whatever, the anxiety of not doing that or having that or getting it right is so intense that it almost slaps her into total organisation and structure so that she can circumvent and control everything she can possibly control so that she doesn't have to end up in this highly anxious state.
Yeah.
Now, that is a gift.
Yeah. And the interesting, the only place that she's not like that is in the home where she's most safe.
Yeah.
You know?
Interesting. But you've got to have both.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah. She's going to always have
you can be, you know, fully controlled here and everywhere. You can't be. There has to be a counterbalance. And so if there's ever anything going on anywhere, socially, anything to do with school, she's my walking, talking newsletter. Like, I don't even ask my son. I don't even ask him for a handout. I go straight to Jade. Jade, what's happening at school this week? Do I need to know anything? And she'll be like, bang, bang, bang.
Isn't that fantastic?
Right.
Personal organizer.
Right? So good. What else do I think about anxiety? I think it keeps you hypervigilant. And I think that serves, particularly as they grow older and become women, and they're, you know, more heightened senses of people and how they receive people and what situations they choose to put themselves in or not. I do really think anxiety serves there. I think it does keep her humbled as well because she's able to really balance her own sense of self.
I think another benefit can be also if we assign like a label, like, you know, I have anxiety, then that also almost can become part of us and another thing to sort of manage or control or limit ourselves by. So if we don't think that we can cope with something that's out of our comfort zone, we can use the label of the condition that we have to avoid things that are uncomfortable. Can be another one. It can, you know, benefit relationships in some ways because we can not have to face parts of relationships that are uncomfortable because we don't like the feelings that the anxiety brings up in us. So it can be used, whether consciously or unconsciously, to benefit us. And the more that we see the benefits of it, the less likely we're going to transform out of it because we're getting those benefits, even if they might be roundabout ways for what we're seeking.
So we realise this is a very broad spectrum ode to anxiety, but we hope that it's still given you some food for thought, either for yourself or for your child. And if you would like to know any more, please get in contact with us at nourishingthemother.com.au, Nourishing the Mother on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your beautiful messages and private messages through socials and emails, because they really do light our world, because who knows, when you put this stuff out in the ether, we don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. We don't know who listens.
So it's really lovely to hear back. It really, is great. And if you've got a topic that you would love to hear us talk about, then certainly email us and we will do our best to connect with you. Bridget?
SuburbanSandcastles.com. And you, Jules?
Is thepleasurenutritionist.com. And remember, you've got to nourish the woman to rock the family.
And we'll see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/The Wellness Couch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives. Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.